Good morning, friends. Good morning. Sorry, I'm about I don't know. Ooh, looks like I'm almost a minute late starting this morning. Sorry about that. Um, PB here, Pastor Brian. I'm the pastor here at Christ Dynamic Methodist Church, and this is another episode of PB Reads the Bible. And thank you for joining me. I love when we're able to get together. I love when we're able to get together in person, but I also love when we're able to get together in this way. The fact that we're able to use technologies that, well, perhaps didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago, and but that I knew nothing about as little as 3 years ago or 2 years ago. So, uh, necessity is the mother of invention, um, and it was also the mother of us figuring things out. Excuse me. Just water today. Hopefully that'll take care of that. But so go ahead and check in this morning. I see a couple people are already doing that. You guys are way ahead of me this morning. You're way ahead of me. We got Maureen checking in. Good morning, Maureen. I do hope it's another sunny day down there for you. Good morning, John and Cindy. Good to have you folks with us as well. And Maureen, if you're still in Norman Beach, I kind of presume you're with Alan and Teresa. Tell them we said hello and send our love. Good morning, Pat. Good to have you live this morning. Awesome. It's helping a little. So we are on episode 10. We are on episode 10 of our journey through the book of Judges. Good morning, Marcia. Hello there. We're on a chapter, so we're on episode 10. That also means we are on chapter 10. Chapter 10. Sometimes that doesn't work out, because sometimes we only do a half a chapter depending on what book we're doing, but it is matching up quite nicely so far with Judges. And chapter 10 is a relatively small chapter. That doesn't mean this is going to be a short session. It means I have more time to talk about something before we start the chapter. I think this is a good time for us to go over a few things. Facebook is burning up over here. Stay safe today in the impending weather. Excellent idea, Cheryl. That is an excellent idea. We normally go for groceries on Friday mornings, but tomorrow morning looks like it's supposed to be even worse than today. So I think I'm going to get my groceries done this afternoon, late afternoon, before my evening meeting. Morning, Ron. Good morning, Marilyn. Excellent. You're there till Sunday morning. Cool. So we're on chapter 10, but before we actually start chapter 10, I think this is a good place for us to talk about a few things. First, a reminder, and then we'll, first is a reminder. Let's go with that one first. We've spoken about the judges, and that there's those different periods, and we can see their mostly gradual descent. Not only judges, but also the nation of Israel. And fidelity and faithfulness to God, as well as the judges anyway, as their ability to lead and to deliver. And we've said that there are the major judges and the minor judges. The minor judges usually only get a couple verses, doesn't give a whole lot of details and things. But when those minor judges appear is important, because it kind of it's usually a transition. It's usually a turning point, and that is going to be the case because the beginning of chapter 10 speaks about a couple minor judges, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. But it does signify a transition, a change, and we can tell that the next judges are going to be aren't going to be as effective as the ones that have already taken place. We've already read about and discussed. Okay. So that's the first thing. Now, Second thing I wanted to cover, and this might be something that you've had a question about, and not just for the last nine sessions. This might be something you've had a question about for a good portion of your life. Um, and I know I did have one person at least sort of ask me this question, so we're going to talk about it. Some of the stories that are coming up get hard to read, especially from a theological point of perspective. They're difficult stories. Many of the stories in the book of Joshua are very difficult to read theologically because they describe such terrible violence. They describe such terrible violence. We see Israel, or different clans within Israel, and different people leading and doing horrific things in the name of God, and to the point where they even say, God told me to do this. This was the instructions and stuff like that. If we read that literally and believe that, then it's very disturbing, especially theologically. And so you might have heard that expression. You might have heard it told, well, that's the Old Testament God. That's not the New Testament God. That's not a good answer. At least not to me. That's like saying there are two different gods, or that's like saying that God's nature changes. And I don't think God's nature changes. I think we can influence God's mind and decisions. We can do that through prayer. We can ask God for intervention in things. So God can be changed to an extent, but God's nature never changes. God's nature is a nature of love. So to say that God is one thing or one way, or has one personality in the Old Testament and a different personality in the New Testament, that just doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't work for me theologically. That is saying that God's nature changes, which again, I don't think that happens. Others might say, well, that's not Jesus. Well, Jesus is God. And so their personalities, again, their natures can't be different. We can't say that God the Father is a God of vengeance and violence, while Jesus is a God of love and grace and mercy, because those are two entirely different natures, but they're the same being. So, whenever I'm reading something, you hear this story. Well, it's the Word of God. Well, that's like saying that God wrote the Bible, which I don't believe that. I don't think God wrote the Bible. I think we've had this discussion before. I'm pretty sure we have. There are different ways to look at and interpret the Bible. Some people will say that it is literally the Word of God, that God dictated it to humans who wrote it down. Whereas on the other far end, that's one far end of the spectrum. The other far end of the spectrum is that God had nothing to do with it, that it was just the writings of human beings. Those are two very opposite understandings. And that leaves a lot for in between. And I do find myself in between those two. I look at the Bible as being written by men, mostly men. There's possibility that some of the writings were by women. I would love to think that at least some of the Psalms and some of the other poetries were written by women. Inspired by God. And that inspiration at different levels of inspiration, so that in some parts it might be closer to not quite God dictated, but in other places, a little bit less, so to speak. So when I'm reading it, so calling it the Word of God, I struggle with sometimes, because to me, the true Word of God is Jesus Christ. That is how he is described by John, the writer of the Gospel of John, that he is the Word of God. And he uses the Greek word logos, which also means reason or mind. So if we want to know what God is like, we compare things to Jesus, and that tells us what God is like. So if I'm reading a story anywhere in the Bible, but in particular in the Old Testament, and I compare it to Jesus, and if it doesn't match up, then I think, okay, why? This really can't be God commanding people to go and completely wipe out a nation, because that does not fit with my understanding of God's real nature. What then is happening? Well, I think what's happening is we have grown theologically. I think that when these stories were written, and when any of the events that were historical and actually took place, I think that when they happened, people believed they were doing it because God wanted it to happen. Which we could still have that understanding over things today, saying that, oh, God wanted this to happen. Well, God probably didn't, but we thought we did he did based on our understanding of God theologically at the time. I hope I'm being clear with this, because this is a hard concept to grasp. I know, and I don't have it fully fleshed out myself, but I hope this makes some sense. So when we see those stories, when we read about horrific events, and we're going to see some, and it seems like they're saying God wanted this to happen, we just have to pause a moment and say, is this how Jesus would have wanted this to take place? And if the answer is no, then the following answer would be, then it can't be what God wanted to happen, because Jesus and God are the same person. Excuse me. So I hope that makes sense. Something we struggle with. All right, now we move to chapter 10. First thing we're going to encounter are two minor judges. So we know this is a transition in the line of judges, and we'll identify most likely a change in their behavior, them going bad again, worse, I should say. So we're going to read the first 5 verses. After Abimelech, Tola, son of Puah, son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, who lived at Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim, rose to deliver Israel. He judged Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried at Shamir. After him came Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years. He had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 towns, which are in the land of Gilead, and are called Havoth Jair to this day. Jair died and was buried in Kaman. Pause. Okay, so we have 2 judges. Doesn't tell us much about them, right? Doesn't tell us much about them at all. We read about Tola, and it says that he delivered Israel, and he judged Israel, he led Israel for 23 years. Okay, 23 years. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that it tells us that he was militarily effective and he did deliver Israel, but only for 23 years. So not as effective as most of the prior judges, including Gideon. Let's think. We've got Gideon and Abimelech were the last two judges that we've spoken about. Now we've got Tola and Jair, and we'll see some comparisons, some contrasts between them. Tola, we can kind of see as a similar character to Gideon, that he was successful, at least fairly successful, maybe not as successful as Gideon, but he did deliver Israel. Jair is more along the lines of Abimelech. Abimelech wasn't concerned with delivering Israel. Abimelech was concerned about consolidating power, making himself king, and seeking vengeance upon people for things that he felt were wrong and all that kind of stuff. Jair, notice it does not say that he delivered Israel. All it says is that he judged Israel for 22 years. So that number is a little bit smaller even. So he was apparently not effective as a deliverer. He judged, but he didn't deliver Israel. And it also tells us that he seems to be more interested in consolidating power and creating almost a dynasty, and gaining money and all that kind of stuff, because it speaks about his possessions and his things. He had 30 sons, 30 donkeys, and 30 cities, 30 towns, whatever. So it's more about what he accumulated than about what he did. And that's what he's remembered for. That's what he's remembered for. He's buried dead and buried in. Come on. All right. Continuing. Oh, now I'm sorry. Pause. Remember how the cycle goes, that Israel does bad, falls away from God, foreign invaders, tormentors. They get down here to the bottom, to the nadir, and they cry out to God for deliverance, and God raises up a deliverer, and they are rescued. It goes back up to the top. And it's usually very brief, that part of the cycle in describing it. Here we're going to see more description. More details about what Israel is doing wrong. We're also going to see God's first denial of their request. Okay. Israelites, again, did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, worshiping the Baals and the Astartes, the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. Thus they abandoned Yahweh and did not worship him. So the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of the Philistines and into the hand of the Ammonites. And they crushed and oppressed the Israelites that year. For 18 years, they oppressed all the Israelites that were beyond the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is in Gilead. The Ammonites also crossed the Jordan to fight against Judah and against Benjamin and against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was greatly distressed. Pause. So it talks about crossing the Jordan. The Jordan is to the east of Israel proper, so to speak. There are some lands, couple going back to the couple clans that wanted the land on that side, and God said, "Yeah, okay, you can have that." Joshua agreed, and that was back in the days of Joshua. They said, "We'll just set up here, but we'll help you out." So they still have Israelites living on the east of the Jordan. So when it speaks about the eastern lands, that's what they're talking about there. But they're crossing over the Jordan and fighting against Judah and Benjamin and Ephraim. What's the big deal there? Well, Judah and Ephraim especially were big names, and so that even them, Remember back to the beginning of Judges, Judah was being held up pretty high, and Judah is now included in this as not living up to how they were supposed to act and are being oppressed. Continuing, verse 10. So the Israelites cried to Yahweh, saying, we have sinned against you because we have abandoned our God and have worshipped the Baals. And Yahweh said to the Israelites, did not I deliver you from the Egyptians and from the Amorites, from the Amorites, from the Ammonites, and from the Philistines? The Sidonians also, and the Amalekites and the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried to me, and I delivered you out of their hand. Yet you have abandoned me and worshipped other gods. Therefore, I will deliver you no more. Go and cry to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them deliver you in the time of your distress. And the Israelites said to Yahweh, we have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you, but deliver us this day. So they put away the foreign gods from among them and worshiped Yahweh. And he could no longer bear to see Israel suffer. Pause. So God says, nope, not going to do it. Not going to help you. Oh, all right, fine, I will. But because they now, not only because they cried out, but because they cried out and because they apparently repented. They at least tried to do the right things, putting away the foreign gods, which means they still had them. They didn't destroy them. They just put them away. And worshiping God rather than these foreign gods. Continuing, then the Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped in Gilead. And the Israelites came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. The commanders of the people of Gilead said to one another, who will begin the fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. Pause. So Gilead is one of the people's groups, or one of the town's clans, not even a full tribe, living east of the Jordan, and that's where the Ammonites are now encamped. But the Israelites, mostly Gileadites, are there to stand up to them. So, cliffhanger, what's going to happen? Who is going to lead this army? Who is going to deliver Israel? Who's going to be the next judge? Stay tuned, or tune in tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel, and we'll take a look at that, and we'll find out who it's going to be. Well, friends, I do again pray that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned something, relearned something, that God has spoken to you in some way this morning. As you go about your days, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, both physical and spiritual, open to what our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, you know what I'm going to say. Say, thank you, Papa, and then tell somebody about it. We need to share those stories. Those are miracles, people. Those are miracles. Until we meet again, be blessed, my friend.